Hey, what's going on, everyone? I'm excited to introduce to you Liam Moore, who is roommates with one of my teammates, um, Alex. So thank you, Alex, for introducing us. I really appreciate. And crazy enough, like I used to live in the same town that he grew up in. It's just crazy world, like how everything's so connected, you know?
Don't undersell it, Davidson. Not a very well-known town. And as he was asking me of my background, we started to just slowly narrow in. And I'm always hesitant to just lead with a hometown, as I'm sure a lot of people are, because you'll say the closest big city or the area, right? And we got more and more narrow, and we we at one point were, I think, living in the same town.
Yeah, it's cool. I could definitely see why you're. I mean, from the brief time that we've gotten to know each other, like you're very gregarious, like very like compassionate, very empathetic, very curious. So your full-time job, I know you're an account executive within the LinkedIn sales solution, but you're also a coach with Commonwealth Coaching, right?
Yeah, that's right.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's interesting because personal finance for me, I would say is something that I was always like afraid of really digging deep into. I think like I definitely grew up with like a scarcity mindset. Like my parents were, we lived off of food stamps. Like, we've never
Hmm.
owned a house before. And, like I think it was something that I was always afraid of exploring. But I think the more you unpack the layers, like it's not as bad as people like think it is, you know?
Yeah, that's spot on, and that's almost part of the gap that we recognized of it being such an uncomfortable and a lot of times unknown topic, especially for younger folks that might not even have a family yet, or maybe were raised with various diverse backgrounds, and that's influenced their view on it. So our goal ultimately is to just bring that common knowledge and make it a little bit more of a comfortable, digestible topic for people. Because personal finance is important for every single person, right? There shouldn't be one person in a household that's dictating it. Maybe there's one that has a little bit more influence and interest in it, but I think everybody should have an understanding and at least the level of comfort to talk about it and acknowledge where they're at with those comfortable to them.
Yeah, it's like one of those things that for some reason it's like so taboo in our society to talk about it. It's interesting because in Asian culture, like it's like very straightforward. It's like people that I don't even know, like my friends, my parents' friends, would just be like, "Oh, well, how much money do you make?" And it's like a very like you can just talk about it openly. But it's interesting, like in
Mm.
America, it's sort of like if I asked that to my fellow colleagues at LinkedIn or something, they'd be like, "What? Like, did this guy just ask me?" Like, that's so weird, you know?
Right, right. And I would think that's one part of it, but I would also think beyond that with personal finance. I mean, we really hone in at Commonwealth Coaching on this wholesome wealth idea. So yes, personal finance is the big part of it. Yeah, how much you make will influence that, right? But there's a lot more than that. It's ultimately how do we help enable you live your ideal lifestyle, right? So whatever it is that's important to you, whatever you're valuing, how do you optimize that and leverage what you can, regardless of what you're making, right? To kind of block out a lot of the noise and uncomfortability and understand what you can and can't do, and what it takes to have the discipline to do so.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like you're getting like, because I do think like you're like relatively young, right? Like have you ever gotten any like pushback on like, oh, like how come you're so fascinated about this at such a young age? Because I do think like I guess from what I've seen, like a lot of my older friends are like really into investment and stuff, and but I feel like I don't have as many like people even your age that are like passionate about it as the way like you and Leslie are, it seems like.
Sure, yeah. And Davidson, you mentioned Leslie, so and Leslie will be on another episode, I believe, right? Or maybe this episode. But Leslie is the founder of Commonwealth Coaching, and somebody that has helped train me and mentor me a little bit, and we've kind of gone back and forth and adding value to one another to create this mission and vision as we have. But right, with the age, and Leslie and I are the same age, and it's really just an acquired interest. My interest really became triggered as I was going to college. That was kind of one of the turning points for me of where I felt my freedom being a little bit limited, especially as it came to understanding how I need to pay for college, right? And I was fortunate enough to have some support from family, from parents, from grandparents. But it was still the biggest part of the conversation was, okay, we need to go to a school that we can afford, right? So that's what really got me interested in is, okay, how should I be thinking about this, right? How should I be thinking about, is it worth it to go to school A and potentially have college debt? Should I look at school, like an option like school B, which might not be my top option, but would reduce the amount of debt I'd be in? Different things like that really interested me. So when I went to college, I made it a point in a little bit of my free time to just understand, okay, what can I do with my money now to help it compound, right? And help maximize what I do have, the little money a college student has, right? And ultimately put my family in the future in a position to have more freedom, right? To not be so worried about, okay, what am I not able to do because of money? I want the conversation to be, oh, okay, we have that freedom where we can actually do what we want, right? What gives us the wholesome wealth and what we see value in, that's what we can do, because we don't really need to think twice about the money because we feel comfortable with where that's at based on how we've budgeted, right? Based on how we've prepared for this moment.
Yeah, I think that that's a good point. I do think a lot of us just go to college just because this is what everyone else is doing, right? A lot of our peers and high school classmates are doing it. So it's sort of just like the next logical thing to do. But I think a lot of us should even think about like, is it worth it to go to college? Like, quite honestly, like I think I might have done just as well if I didn't go to college. Like, I mean, who knows, right? It's hard to, but I
Mhm.
did myself in a lot of student debt, and I didn't really, I've never really thought about like, oh, okay, like is it really worth it? It was just sort of like, oh, I guess I should do this, you know. So I do think a lot of people fall into that trap of like they go through college but they're not even sure what they're going to use the degree for, and then they graduate and they're like stressed out because they just have so much student loans, and then you're like,
Mm,
it's going to take me forever to pay this off, you know.
sure, sure. And it goes back to the age thing, which Davidson, I think, was a great acknowledgement, right? Having younger people that have this vested interest in personal finance now. And I think a big part of that is that's kind of also what drove me and motivated me is seeing a lot of friends just be so uncomfortable, right? So how can we solve that? I think a lot of people think about personal finance as, oh, I don't really know where the heck my money is going. I don't really need to know because I'm young, or no, I don't really want to have that commitment and that burden of having, say, a financial advisor that's 30 years older than me, right? That's a commitment. I don't want that. That scares me, right? So I think it means something having that communication of just a comfortable conversation from somebody that's in a similar boat to you, right? Okay, we graduated college however long ago. We're now making money. Let's just be comfortable about where we're putting our money and why. And where I'm putting it, Davidson, and where you're putting it are going to be two different places based on what we value,
Mm.
right? And for two different goals, right? So it'll be unique to everybody. And I think it's hard to find what that goal is if you're not comfortable talking about it and really just understanding feedback from others to make your own plan.
How do you not get influenced by what your parents want? Or even like if you are like entering, like for instance, like I got engaged recently, right? How do you, what if your partner,
Congrats.
thanks, man.
Let's like, hold on. Like, I don't know, a round of applause. Can't just breeze over that one.
Yeah, like luckily it happened like right before like the COVID stuff. So like,
Okay, good. I know people that are trying to go through the process now, and it's okay. I need to go to this place to get a ring. Can I even enter that place? Where can we now change our plans of the proposal? Right. So, congrats. That's awesome. Awesome to hear.
thank you. But I do think a lot of people who are engaged like probably think about this. But what if your person, some of your values, financial values, are different than your partner's values, right? How does one kind of meet in the middle and come up with like a win-win? You know?
Yeah, yeah, and that's also again going to be unique to every couple. based on where they are. But I think that conversation is so important to have
Mm.
and to prioritize, honestly. I don't know how, there is a stat behind it. I don't know the most updated stat, but a pretty outrageous amount of divorces or breakups are as a result of finances,
Yeah.
which is tough to hear. And I'm not surprised by that, right? But I think it is an avoidable problem if you're able to tackle it early. So I think you do need to become comfortable with your significant other, especially as you look at consolidation, likely what you're starting to look at, Davidson. And I'm sorry if I'm assuming, but as you think about, oh, okay, marriage and however long, right? Consolidating bank accounts, maybe, right? Consolidating whatever it is. And again, other couples might be different, but I know it's a common consideration as you get engaged,
Yeah.
right? So that conversation is so important to get ahead of. And it sounds so funny, but I am huge on writing out lists, like brainstorming, not only verbally, but like whiteboard it or like write it down in a notebook. Like make it a fun activity for you and your significant other. Go on a little date and or have a a fun morning, go on a hike and then get breakfast. But like on the hike, let's talk about it, and at breakfast, let's just spend 30 minutes penciling out what's the most valuable to us, what we really want to prioritize in our lives together.
Like,
And then we can backtrack and find out, okay, how can we now marry our financial strategies to help us achieve X, Y, and Z, right? Everything we put on our top priority page. Those are ways where I think about it. And I really would recommend getting ahead of the conversation rather than being reactionary down the road when you start to disagree. It unfortunately might be a little bit too late because you might be a little bit too close-minded at that point of exactly what you thought. And it doesn't always align with what the married couple thinks, right?
yeah, that's pretty wise. I think um that's amazing that like both of you like are thinking about all this and empowering so many people at such a young age, because to your point, most financial advisors are like much older, right? So there's that lack of it's just hard to relate sometimes, like different stages, like different parts in life. And but I do like your
Sure.
advice about like it all starts with communication, and it starts with like sometimes just having that uncomfortable conversation, even if it's with yourself, right? I think sometimes we're like
Mm-hmm.
afraid of having that conversation. I know I was always, because it was always worse because I just wouldn't deal with it. And then when I finally dealt,
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, oh,
That's common, yeah.
it's not as bad as I thought it was.
Right, right. Yeah, it's not, yeah. I mean, that's super common, right? Of, hey, I just don't want to deal with this right now. And also on the side, Leslie and I obviously are not financial advisors, right? And I think that's part of having the comfortable conversation is a lot of it's a trust thing. A lot of it is, hey, I didn't study this, right? I did not go to school to become a financial advisor. If that's what you're looking for, I can make a recommendation or point you in the direction of one of those firms. But I'm like many 20 somethings, right? Whether it's early to late 20 somethings who's now starting to make a little money and trying to understand the best place to put it. I've just put a lot of effort forth to connect with different mentors of different ages, of different backgrounds. In addition to that, a lot of my own research, a lot of things like connecting with Leslie and becoming part of Commonwealth Coaching. In addition to that, Leslie and I also launched our own podcast. It's called Seeds, and Seeds is available wherever you listen to your podcasts, whether it's Apple, Spotify, right? And we bring guests on to talk about what their ideal lifestyles are and how they leverage finances to get there. So we've had people from the East Coast to the West Coast of different ages with different perspectives. And that's my education, right? So that's my financial education. Um, I mean, yeah, it caught me red-handed. I'm not a financial advisor. I did not study finance in college, to be honest. I just enjoy having the conversation, and I became comfortable with that conversation early on and found mentors that I believed in, and I think that's what's gotten me to become so comfortable about it. And that's what we want to kind of empower everybody to do, right? More people should be more comfortable having this conversation. And it certainly takes some baby steps to get there. Start with one of your best friends. Just start with somebody you're really comfortable with. Doesn't have to be a parent. obviously a common misconception that I think we were alluding to a little bit earlier, Davidson, of how do we not believe what our parents believe? While yes, I do look at my father as one of my financial mentors, I don't agree with everything that he has to say about money, but a lot of it, I take a lot of tidbits. And we have such an open dialogue that we'll talk back and forth and sometimes not completely agree with one another. But I think that's what you'll get in finance, right? Everybody is so unique and values different things, and that's their reason for believing things. So figure out what's right for you. And I think that'll help you have a more open dialogue with a lot more comfortability and create this scary personal finance bubble and kind of burst that.
Yeah, I think. I mean, what are your thoughts? Are because it's interesting because a lot of my friend, like, I mean, not a lot. Some of my friends, they'll travel to other countries, right? And they'll see the people who like don't really have a lot of money, but seem so happy. Like they don't have to clock in at 9 to 5, right? It's like a different lifestyle, right? It might be more like farm work or more like, like it's a little bit different.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like if you don't necessarily need to have like multiple houses and be like a landlord and do all this in order to be happy. Like I've seen people be like just as happy with like almost next to nothing, but they just have freedom knowing that like they don't have to like answer to their boss. Like when their boss emails them, like you don't have to answer them in 24 hours or whatever, right? It's interesting. Like I'm definitely realizing that there's just so many ways to look at like wealth, right? It doesn't necessarily mean like money.
That's spot on. Yeah, that's music to my ears to hear that, Davidson. That's exactly right. We on our podcast on Seeds, we've had on people that gave up their corporate jobs, and this is exactly where my mind went as you were mentioning that. Gave up their corporate jobs and bought a van and made a little van house, and they went across the country over the course of 2 years,
Yeah.
and they lived out of their van. It was a really, really cool van. You can see it on Instagram and everything. There's a bed, there's this fold up little kitchenette area, really cool van. But right, that was it. Yeah, they took a huge pay cut. But they also cut their expenses and they were living a wealthy lifestyle based on what fulfills them. So you're right. They were not getting the same paycheck, but they were living a very, very wealthy lifestyle because they were being fulfilled by being able to backpack around, hike, camp, right? Those were all things that brought them happiness. So on our podcast, we tipped our cap to them, great for kudos to you for unlocking your ideal lifestyle, right? And leveraging your comfortability with finances to do so, right? That's a big pride thing too, right? I'm going to step away from this job and I'm not going to make much money at all. I'm okay with that. Making money does not align with what I want. On the other end of the spectrum, yes, Davidson, you do have those people that want a mansion, right? Or want that penthouse in New York City that's a few floors above you, right? Or right. So there are people that certainly go for that, and that's not a bad thing at all.
Yeah.
But that lifestyle, to unlock that, you'll likely need a little bit more money, right? So just understanding that, and that's where we get to those unique differences from person to person. So it's very case by case. So I think that's where everybody needs to start. That's where I would encourage all of you to start. Find out what's valuable to you, what lifestyle that you want to live, and then backtrack and find out, okay, how do I need to be financially to do so? Great. Check the box. I now feel a lot more comfortable with what I need to do. I can see it, right? I can see it on a piece of paper. To do this, I need to be able to have this amount of money. And if I don't have that amount of money, I can't live the ideal lifestyle. I could still live. If I have more than that amount, I don't need to really worry much at all, right? So just different ways to look at it. It's always really interesting to hear what people value. Another little plug that I would recommend, one of the books that got me really interested in this topic was I Will Teach You to Be Rich by Ramit Sethi.
Yeah, he's the best.
You're reacting. I'm not, yeah, I don't know if you follow Ramit, but
Yeah, he's such a great communicator. Yeah.
it's like you hear his voice when you're reading the book. And I think that's what it was, right? It was like not a financial advisor writing this, not somebody that's, however old, writing this very structured book. He's using voices, his voice. He's using some, I think, curse words throughout, right, and just really being conversational. And I was like, wow, this is actually a really comfortable topic with him.
Yeah.
And that's another thing that empowered me, right? So somebody I recommend you all follow. He's very opinionated. So again, you might not agree with everything he says.
Uh,
Maybe you will, but I encourage you to really believe. Not everything that anybody says is always correct, right? So while he's certainly somebody that's influenced me, I don't agree with every video he puts out with, but a lot of it I gain a lot of value out of, and I continue to follow. Um, One of the examples he used, though, is one of his old buddies in New York City went out every weekend and spent $1,000 at a club every single weekend,
uh,
which might sound to a lot of people, oh my gosh, that's a lot of money, right? How could I go to a club and spend $1,000 tonight, right? And this person was doing it consistently. But that was this person's ideal lifestyle. So they cut out and became minimalists in so many other parts of their life that a lot of us wouldn't think twice about,
yeah.
right? So doing things like not spending anything on public transportation, only walking from A to B, just little things that are saving them a couple dollars every day or whatever it is. And they're able to establish this budget to make them feel guilt-free with their finances, spending 1,000 all the time at the club. And not necessarily where I'm putting my money, but that's what it is. It's different for everybody, right?
Yeah.
So understand that, and understand everybody has a different ideal lifestyle. So don't try to keep up with the Joneses, as they say. That beautiful house on the beautiful hill, that might not be for everybody, right? And it's not for most people, I would say.
Yeah, I think one of the things Ramit Sethi is amazing. I think he was also someone that really got me into a lot of this.
Yeah,
One of the things that I always remember from him that I really enjoy is he's like, when you're thinking about buying a book and you can't make a decision, buy that book. Because more often than not, the ROI is like way more than how much you're spending on it, right? And I was like, that's amazing. Now and because of that, I buy tons of books now. But hey, like he says, like it's helped me grow a lot. So most of the time,
right.
yeah.
Such a good example, right? If you're going back and forth, if it was a few dollars less, but you don't even think about the ROI of having a book,
Yeah.
right? For example, I bought that book. I don't repeat. I'm sorry if I got the amount wrong. No clue. I don't know. I'd say I bought in this example for $15. I don't know. But it's created this whole new interest form, or not created, but encouraged and added value to this whole new interest to me. That's now being monetized, right? So, and I didn't see that coming at all. I bought this book, I think, as a freshman or sophomore in college. And after reading it, we just felt, wow, I want to make this a comfortable topic.
Hmm.
Like I was like, this is cool how comfortably he speaks about money and his friends being what a lot of people would call idiots with money, right? Like, oh, that person spent tens of thousands at the bar last night. But you can't always judge it like that, right? Don't judge a book by its cover. I mean, understand, no, that person actually is a lot smarter with money in other places where you might not be. And maybe, so right. So how everybody looks at it is a little bit different.
Yeah, and then I feel like you would also like are you familiar? I think his name is Narav, um the guy who started AngelList.
Oh, yeah,
Narav.
what's his name? I'm gonna cheat. I don't know it off the top of my head.
But have you listened to his content? Man, he has some good content out there.
A little bit. It's Naval. Yeah,
Okay.
Naval Ravikant. So I haven't consistently, but I've seen articles come up. And right, but I mean, Davidson, kind of to the point of this is where the conversation starts, right? So honestly, once we're finished up chatting, I'll probably look a little bit more into Naval tonight, right? And this is where this conversation starts to become comfortable. And great. Now then, just beyond my conversations with Davidson and how comfortable we're becoming talking about this, I'm going to start to look into some more people that might influence me and might mentor me, right? Maybe I might go follow Naval Ravikant on social media,
Yeah,
right? So just little things like that. I think that's why it's really important to have this dialogue.
yeah, you're right. I think like for me, the reason why like I didn't like think about it too much was because like I think like like I guess like my parents didn't really talk about it that much. So there weren't a lot of people in my life that really talked about it. And then
Mm,
once I started going to a lot more of these self-development seminars and started being around like entrepreneurs, like I'm like, oh, okay. So it's interesting to see like how much you can really change, and it's just a choice, right? Like 1 second you could be like nothing, and then like a year later it could be a completely different like mindset. And I think that's pretty cool, like how we live in this world of just abundance where like you can really like any topic you want, you can like really dig deep and just grow like so quickly.
Sure. Yeah, spend the time. The resources are out there, right? And it sounds, you mentioned you invested in going to some self-development seminars. And right, I think that's an investment for you that was certainly justified, right? So I think a lot of people could see a seminar that can range, be various different prices, but maybe, oh, this $200 seminar, I can't really afford that. But think about that return, right? Hey,
Yep.
if that's actually valuable to you, that might be something that you want to go to, right?
Yeah.
Maybe budget for it. Maybe cut out Ubers and Lyfts and ride shares. That right? Maybe ride your bike places, right? Little ways where you can. Oh, that's a good point. Okay, if I do that for the entire month, I'll actually save $100, right? Just little ways where you can kind of plan and budget for these, which is why I think it's so relevant to write out those values and what's valuable to you, so you can then understand, where am I putting my money to best use.
I'm curious, like, and I know everyone is different, but what are some of the values that you've established, as you yeah, because I think it is interesting because sometimes people don't even know, because I don't think everyone really does take the time to really sit down and like spend an hour to write out all of these things, right? I think sometimes people are more reactive as things come up,
Yeah.
like, oh, okay, I'm getting married, like maybe I should like start to think about, but I think there's people sometimes need like a trigger point or some event for them to actually like really like you know do like a deep dive of these things.
Yeah, yeah. I guess if I were to break it down, and I can get even more specific and tell you what are my little splurges specifically, right? For example, I'm a big craft beer snub.
Hmm.
I'll for sure go to a bar, and rather than getting the $2 Miller Lite special, I'll go for that local $9 craft beer. I got to try it while I'm in the city, right? You got the local brewery. Yeah, let's go there.
Yeah.
So that's something that I love to splurge on. Another thing, as you're kind of seeing behind me, is I love the outdoors. I love traveling. I love hiking. I love lakes. Camping is something I enjoy a lot. So a big ambition of mine is I want to have a lake house, right?
Oh, cool.
So I do want a little getaway lake house. I know, so I'm getting pretty specific here on, okay, these are things where I know I'll need money down the road. So ideally, if I have a lake house by the time I'm 40 years old, right, I'll need to have this much saved, and I'll try to budget conservatively. So if I'm putting aside this much each year until then, I'll be comfortable achieving that, right? So then backtrack. Okay, what do I need to do each month to make sure I'm putting aside this amount each year, right?
Mhm.
Little things like that, I'll backtrack. But in terms of my more broad values, which is where all of this stems from, I guess a few different pillars. I think of family as the highest, right? So Davidson, we caught up a little bit more before this, and that's where we discovered the hometown connection. But a lot of my family still lives in the Northeast, right? I'm currently based in Chicago, and I don't have family out here at all. But I'm very close with my family, and they all span from anywhere from the greater New York City area up to the Boston area, and then a few in a little bit more mid-Atlantic, but primarily up in New England or in the New York City area. And I get back there pretty often, right? So how that relates to finance, right? With family being my top pillar, what I value most is, oh, okay, when others in my family are just driving a few minutes for a holiday, I need to budget for a round trip flight, right? I need to think of how I'm getting to the airport. I'm in the city right now with no car. Ride shares in the city aren't the most affordable. So I'm thinking of all of these things, and I'm putting money aside where I'm comfortably able to do that, because that's what I value the most. And I would hate to be limited in doing that and inhibited from seeing family because of finances,
Yeah.
regardless of what I'm making, right? Because that would be shame on me. I didn't plan for that. And that's something that I would feel so left out if I missed a holiday, or
Mhm.
family members uh, I don't know, accolades, right? Things like that I want to be home for. Um, the other thing is health. So I'm very interested in health, different health trends, exercise, diets. I'll go to a grocery store and spend a lot more for a healthier product than kind of that, oh, cheapest option, it's on sale, nice. Not always the most relevant to me, but again, I plan for that, right? So with health being another pillar of mine, what I value, that trickles down into, okay, I need to expect having a more expensive grocery check. I need to think about, oh, a pandemic hits, I can no longer go exercise at a gym. I need to think about, okay, is it worth it to get a workout set for home? And then you go online and notice, oh my gosh, all the dumbbells are sold out because everybody's trying to do this. And then you really start to see the price of dumbbells. Honestly, I never really knew they were as expensive as they were because I was going to a facility to work out.
Yeah.
And the thought came to my mind for a second, is it worth it? And I was like, yes. I mean, this is part of my daily routine, and it makes me wholesomely sane, right? I need to have this part of my life, and continue to live a healthy lifestyle. So for me, I just kind of planned, okay, this is going to be an expense, but hey, maybe I'm not paying for a gym membership. Maybe I'm not taking Ubers and Lyfts right now because I'm not comfortable doing that during the pandemic. Um, so a few different areas where you're seeing, okay, yes, I'll have the money for this by the end of the month because I'm going to cut out these expenses, right? So I find those values, right? Family, health, and the other one is just a wealthy lifestyle, right? So we go back to, no, that doesn't mean making a lot of money. That means being able to pursue these things comfortably, with finance being a back thought, because I feel like I proactively prepared from the financial perspective.
Wow, yeah. I mean, you're very grounded. I think honestly, like I don't know too many people like your age that's really this thoughtful in their approach and, like even the lake house and stuff like that, right? I think it's awesome. I think LinkedIn does hire like obviously like very intelligent people, like very thoughtful people. But I do think like, and maybe this is why you started the podcast, but I do think like the majority of people like don't plan this far ahead. Like I don't think like your thought process and everything, I think it is like not the norm. Like I don't think the average person thinks about this at your age. So it sounds like, is that like one of the reasons why you started the podcast? Because I mean, you mentioned something about like your, you saw your friends that were in college and your peers. Um, so I guess like, what's the target audience for your podcast? Is it for like younger people or is it like for literally anyone?
Yeah, it can be used for anyone. We have listeners anywhere from the age of 14 to about low 50s. I think it's 53, 54. I would say our really target demographic is those late teens to 20s to early 30s. And the reason being is I think that pool of people, and not to stereotype at all or profile people in that age range, but a lot of that's, it's common where that's the age where people start to get a paycheck, right? Okay, I'm now able to work my first job in my late teens, legally, right? That my first W-2 payroll job. Or maybe it's your 20s. Okay, I graduated college and I just got my first job. Awesome. Or maybe it's your later 20s. Okay, I now have enough money to move to my own apartment in a new city, right? Just different decisions that are progressing towards your professional career, where you're likely pursuing those decisions to make some more money, right? And then with that comes, okay, wait, I've been living on college buying $1 beers, not ever having more money than that to do anything else. And now I have my first couple paychecks. What do I do? Right. And I think rather than being uncomfortable, that's kind of what we're trying to solve is, well, Leslie and I do like to believe we have an influence. We have a few virtual clients, but a lot of our client base that we interact directly with in person are in Chicago. So we thought, how can we scale this out a little bit more, while also just gaining more perspectives, right? Understanding more. The more we can talk to people about this, the more we learn, the more we hope they learn, and the more our perspectives our listeners and our follower base can have to then make those decisions for themselves. So that's what really drove us launching Seeds, as kind of an extension to Commonwealth Coaching of, great, here's a foundation now that's accessible everywhere and is almost a living permanent library for people of this interest to kind of go through based on different topics or interests of their own.
That's awesome. Yeah, I do think I listen to a lot of like financial podcasts, and I do think it's I think it's awesome what you're doing because I think to your point, most of the people that do the financial podcasts are much later, like they're usually like 50s or 60s, in their 50s or 60s usually. So it is awesome to get like a different perspective of, because some of the conversations, like they're just so far further ahead in their careers, and I think it's good to have like a lot of different perspectives, and you're reaching an audience that quite frankly like probably should think about it much earlier.
Mm-hmm.
So that's awesome what you're doing. Good.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And that's another part is getting that wider reach, right? So we're even reaching across the globe. We're listened to in several countries. And frankly, I've never had a coaching session with any clients in a different country, but being able to track the podcast and see, whoa, we have listeners in these 23 countries, right? That's pretty nice to hear, because something you alluded to earlier, Davidson, was the Asian culture and how it might be different, right? In terms of being able to share what you're making and how commonplace that is, or being raised by parents of different cultures or origins. That's all what's influencing a lot of what people believe and the foundations that they have. So this is another way where we can help kind of bring the perspective that we have globally. And again, some people likely will disagree and some will likely agree. But that's what gets the conversation so interesting, and I think empowers people to feel more comfortable talking about it.
Awesome. Yeah, a lot of good takeaways. Definitely, some of my main takeaways from our conversation is definitely just like have the conversation. If it's uncomfortable, like I think that's good because that means like
It will be. Yeah. I
yeah,
promise you it'll be uncomfortable at first. And for a lot of it.
yeah, but that means like there's growth, right? That means like there,
Yeah, absolutely. Right. That's not a bad thing. Uncomfortable is not always bad, right?
yeah. Well, thank you so much for your perspectives. I guess a couple questions. I'm curious, like, what are some advice that you would give for like new podcasters, like people that want to start their own podcast? Like, because I feel like it's becoming more people are realizing like, oh, okay, this is like really cool. And to your point, like you have access to all these amazing mentors, and that's such a cool thing, especially at this stage in your career. You're still relatively young.
Sure. Yeah, yeah. My advice is pretty simple. Dive in. I think Leslie and I, when we were lingering around with this idea, allowing it to nurture a little bit, and then we kind of caught ourselves doing that and said, why are we letting this nurture? Let's just go for it. It's not like our first episode is going to be listened to by millions of people. No, we can honestly just record it and you and I can listen to it, then share it with some of these mentors, maybe get their feedback, right? So you really just need to dive in, because we found ourselves completely trying to overplan it. And the basis of Seeds is it's very brief and digestible, right? None of our episodes are over 25 minutes. Most are in the 15 to 20-minute range, which is what we shoot for. And the reason being is we want it to be a very digestible topic, right? Again, to that commitment piece of, okay, we don't need to feel so committed and go to a 65-year-old and have a serious sit-down conversation. No, it's similar to this, Davidson. Two friends hanging out, in some cases, whatever it is, like having a drink, right? Hanging out at the bar, having a conversation about personal finance and how we define our ideal lifestyle and a wealthy lifestyle. And that's what we recognized. And we jumped in, and it compounded pretty quick. We didn't know a thing about podcasting. We learned pretty quick. We now have hired somebody who's helping us out with our podcast, so it's really started to compound and monetize. And and it started with just an idea, and then us researching the best free podcast apps because we weren't spending much money on it, didn't really have money to spend on it. And then we just dove in, and it did compound, and we fortunately made our first hire and are having somebody help take it to the next level with us. But that all started with us diving in, right? We started with no experience. Neither of us had ever recorded a podcast or been on a podcast. And that was the inception of Seed. So that would be my advice to all of those that are thinking about starting, maybe just started, just continue to do it, because it does take discipline. It's easy, right? Okay, I did 5 episodes, didn't really catch. I couldn't tell you one podcast that caught after 5 episodes, right? Even after 20 episodes, right? So make sure it's a topic you enjoy too, because these conversations are really fun. And Davidson, I was thrilled to hear. I feel like there are some scripted podcasts, which there's nothing wrong with that. But I feel, Seeds, we don't necessarily script our conversations with our guests. And that's been a similar feel here. And making it conversational is just part of the comfortability.
Yeah, yeah, Liam, and thank you so much for everything. Want to acknowledge you for like just being able to create a space where people can have these conversations in a fun way. It doesn't have to be hard, doesn't have to be like scary. It could be chill, it could be, and just being open to just sharing with the world like all these different perspectives. Like you're definitely gonna have like a huge fan. Like everything that you said like definitely resonates with me, because there are so many financial podcasts out there. Some, I try to be picky with which ones I choose, just because there's so many out there. But I mean, everything you're saying like definitely resonates with me. So you definitely have a loyal fan here for sure.
I appreciate that, Davidson. And right back at you. Right, this is how the community builds. A lot of referral based, right? Lots of shares. So really excited to continue the conversation beyond this with you. And also really grateful for all the nuggets that I was able to grab from you throughout this conversation, and just talking about it. It's always kind of continuous learning, I think, for us. So this has been a thrill. I've really enjoyed this.
Awesome. Well, I hope you have an amazing night. And yeah, thanks for your time.
Yeah, absolutely. Enjoy the hump day, right? Wednesday. I don't know when this episode's launching, but recording on the Wednesday, and yeah, appreciate that, Davidson. We'll be in touch soon.
Cool.
All right, great. Thanks.